The vermilion light of EOS 9's twin moons spilled through the canopy of bioluminescent fronds, casting long shadows across the research compound. Dr. Mara Nguyen adjusted her respirator and checked the oxygen levels on her wrist monitor. 87% atmospheric toxicity. Better than yesterday, but still lethal without protection. She tightened the straps of her exosuit and stepped out of the airlock, boots sinking slightly into the spongy purple moss that carpeted the clearing. 3 weeks into her expedition, and Mara still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Not by her colleagues. The mining corporation's skeleton crew gave the science division a wide berth, but by something else, something native to this beautiful, deadly world. Perimeter check complete. All sensors operational, she reported into her comms unit. The electric fence hummed in the background, its blue glow barely visible in the reddish twilight. Beginning day 22 of primary apex predator behavioral study. Static crackled in her ear. Copy that. Dr. Nguyen. Remember Protocol 612. Observation only. The voice belonged to Major Solberg, head of security, whose skepticism about her research was matched only by his devotion to regulations. Understood, Major. She switched off the comm before adding under her breath, as if I'd forget after your daily reminders. The research tent stood at the edge of the compound, deliberately positioned to capture readings from the surrounding wilderness while remaining within the fence's protection. Inside, holographic displays flickered with vital signs from the tracking beacons she'd managed to deploy. 12 Arkrans, the planet's apex predators, roamed within a 50-kilometer radius. Their movements formed patterns she was only beginning to decipher. Mara settled into her workstation, fingers dancing across the holographic interface as she compiled her morning notes. Subject designation, Arkran. Physiology, quadrupedal endotherms, averaging 2.5 meters in length, with secondary limb structures capable of limited manipulation, dense musculature, and reinforced skeletal system suggesting evolution in high-gravity environment. Distinctive features include thermal-sensitive dermal plates and dual respiratory systems. She paused, then added a personal observation. Unlike reports from initial surveys, Arkrans display complex social behaviors, including cooperative hunting strategies and possible rudimentary communication through subvocal vibrations. Corporate assessment of mindless predators appears increasingly inaccurate. A soft alarm chimed. One of her trackers had registered unusual activity. Beacon 7, an older female Arkran she'd been monitoring since arrival, showed elevated stress hormones and rapid movement patterns. Predator or prey, Mara wondered, reaching for her field kit. Liara, she called to the compound's engineer, who was adjusting a malfunctioning air filter nearby. I'm heading to Observation Point Delta. The fence is still stable on the eastern quadrant, right? The engineer, a thin woman with close-cropped silver hair, looked up from her work. Should be. Had some power fluctuations last night, but nothing breached. Why? Found something interesting? Maybe. Mara shouldered her pack. Unusual readings from one of the tagged specimens. I'll stay within the safe zone. Just going to use the ridge for better visual range. Liara nodded, though her expression remained concerned. Take a flare, at least. Those Fenrecs have been getting bolder since the mining started in Sector 4. Mara patted the utility belt at her waist. Always do. The ridge overlooking the eastern valley offered the perfect vantage point. From here, she could scan nearly 3 kilometers of terrain while remaining just inside the perimeter fence. The lush vegetation, primarily in toxic warning colors of bright orange, electric blue, and vibrant purple, created a stark contrast against the dark, volcanic soil. Through her binoculars, Mara swept the landscape methodically. Movement caught her eye. a flash of scaled hide between crimson fern analogs. She adjusted the focus, heart accelerating. There it was, an Archrin. Not the one she'd been tracking, but larger, probably male, given the pronounced thermal plates along its spine. The creature moved with surprising grace for its size, each step calculated despite its obvious agitation. It was bleeding from multiple lacerations along its flanks. Then she saw why. 3 smaller predators, fenrecs, with their characteristic hooked claws and elongated jaws, had formed a hunting triangle around the wounded Archrin. They darted in and out, taking turns to slash at the larger predator's legs, wearing it down systematically. "Fascinating," Mara whispered, activating her recorder. "Coordinated pack hunting behavior against an apex predator. Previously undocumented interspecies, competitive." Her scientific observation was cut short by a sound that raised the hair on her neck. Not the expected snarl of confrontation, but something else, a keening wail from the Archrin that conveyed something beyond mere animal aggression. Pain, yes, but also something that sounded disturbingly like desperation. Mara's fingers tightened on the binoculars. Protocol dictated non-interference. This was nature at work, the ecological balance of EOS 9 playing out as it had for millennia before humans arrived. Her job was to document, not intervene. But as she watched the Archrin stagger, one leg buckling beneath a particularly vicious attack, that keening cry came again. This time, it struck a chord deep within her, bypassing scientific detachment and reaching something more primal. "Damn it!" She lowered the binoculars and reached for her belt. Protocol be damned. Before she could second-guess herself, Mara activated the high-frequency sonic emitter designed to repel smaller predators during emergencies. The effect was immediate. The fenrecs froze, their elongated heads swiveling toward the source of the painful sound. One broke away immediately, disappearing into the underbrush with a screech. The others hesitated, caught between their prize and the invisible threat. Mara increased the frequency, simultaneously retrieving a flare from her belt. The bright magnesium flash would disorient the fenrecs' sensitive vision, hopefully providing enough disruption to end the hunt. The flare arced through the air, landing between the remaining fenrecs and the wounded Archrin. Its harsh white light bloomed against the twilight, casting everything in stark, shadowless illumination. The smaller predators recoiled, finally retreating with angry vocalizations that echoed across the valley. In the sudden silence that followed, Mara found herself staring directly at the Archrin. Its breathing came in labored gasps, orange ichor seeping from multiple wounds. But it was the creature's eyes that held her transfixed, vertical pupils, dilated against iridescent amber irises, reflecting the flare's light while revealing something she hadn't expected to see in a so-called mindless predator. Intelligence, awareness, and something that made her throat tighten. Recognition. For several heartbeats, neither moved. Then, defying everything the corporate briefings had taught about Archrin behavior, the creature didn't charge. Instead, it took one halting step backward, then another, maintaining eye contact until it reached the tree line. Only then did it turn, disappearing into the dense foliage with remarkable stealth despite its injuries. Mara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands trembled slightly as she deactivated the sonic emitter and recorded what had just happened. "Subject interaction log," she began, voice steadier than she felt. "I may have just violated about 6 different protocols, but I've also witnessed unprecedented behavior from an Archrin specimen. Response to intervention was not aggressive, but cautious, calculated. If I didn't know better, I'd say it understood what happened." She paused, watching the tree line where the creature had vanished. "I'm going to name this one Atlas." The next morning, Mara woke before the compound's artificial day cycle began. Sleep had been elusive, her dreams filled with amber eyes and haunting cries. She dressed quickly and slipped out of her quarters, nodding to the night shift guards, who looked too bored to question her early start. At her research tent, she checked the tracking data immediately. Beacon 7 showed normal activity, but there was no signal from the Archrin she'd encountered yesterday. No surprise. She hadn't had the opportunity to tag it. What did surprise her was what she found at the perimeter fence closest to her observation point. 3 long, parallel marks gouged into the soil, with a small depression in the center. Beside it lay the tattered remains of what appeared to be a native herbivore, a juvenile grazer with 6 legs and a bifurcated jaw. "What the hell?" Mara murmured, crouching to examine the scene. The marks weren't random. They'd been deliberately placed just outside the fence line, visible from her research tent but not from the main compound. The dead grazer was untouched, except for a killing bite to the neck. Not eaten, just delivered. A chill ran down Mara's spine. Could it be? Had Atlas brought this here? She knew better than to venture outside the fence alone, especially without notifying security. But she also knew what would happen if she reported this. Major Solberg would double patrols, raise the fence voltage, and likely restrict her field research even further. Instead, she returned to her tent and retrieved her medical kit and a portable scanner. Then, ensuring no one was watching, she temporarily deactivated a small section of the fence, just enough to reach through with a collection tool. The scanner confirmed her suspicions. Trace genetic material on the dead grazer matched what corporate databases classified as Archrin. The creature, Atlas, had made a kill and deliberately brought it to the perimeter of the human camp. To her, "This isn't standard territorial marking," she recorded quietly. "This appears to be an offering, a demonstration, further observation required." For the next 3 days, Mara established a pattern. Each morning before dawn, she would check the perimeter. Each time, she found evidence that Atlas had visited overnight, sometimes another small kill, sometimes just those distinctive marks in the soil. On the 3rd morning, she decided to take a risk. She brought her own offering, a small medical kit designed for xenobiological first aid, using a long-handled clamp. She placed it beside the fence, where Atlas had left his previous gifts, along with a portable camera. When she reviewed the footage the next day, her heart nearly stopped. The recording showed Atlas approaching cautiously in the dead of night, massive form ghosting out of the darkness like a living shadow. The creature examined her offering, massive head lowering to sniff the medical supplies. Then, with deliberate care, it used its secondary limbs, smaller appendages normally kept folded against its body, to open the kit. What followed defied everything known about Archrin intelligence. The creature sorted through the supplies, setting aside items it couldn't use, before selecting the spray antiseptic and wound sealant, with movements that spoke of painful effort, but unmistakable purpose. Atlas applied the medication to its worst injuries. Mara watched the recording 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. This wasn't instinctive behavior. This was problem-solving, tool use, and implicit communication. "Atlas," she whispered to the empty tent. "What are you?" That afternoon, she made a decision she knew violated every safety protocol in the book. She waited until the day shift changed, creating a brief window when the monitoring system cycled, then carrying only essential equipment and an emergency beacon. She slipped through a maintenance access in the fence and headed toward the ridge where she'd first encountered Atlas. The alien forest closed around her, a riot of toxic colors and unfamiliar sounds. Her exosuit's filtration system hummed steadily, protecting her from the atmospheric toxins, but nothing could shield her from the growing sense that she was being followed. An hour into her unauthorized excursion, she found what she was looking for: fresh Arcran tracks leading to a sheltered ravine. Following them brought her to a small clearing beside a stream of surprisingly clear water. And there, drinking carefully from the water's edge, was Atlas. The creature looked better than she'd expected. The wound sealant had done its job, closing the worst lacerations. Still, several injuries remained untreated, and its movements suggested lingering pain. Mara stood frozen at the clearing's edge, suddenly aware of the madness of her plan. She'd come alone, without backup, to find an apex predator capable of tearing her exosuit, and her, to shreds in seconds. Atlas sensed her presence immediately. Its head snapped up, water dripping from scaled lips as those amber eyes locked onto her. A low rumble vibrated the air between them, slowly, telegraphing every movement. Mara set down her pack and raised empty hands. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, knowing the words themselves meant nothing but hoping the tone might convey her intent. The Arcran's thermal plates shifted, their iridescent surfaces catching the filtered sunlight. It made no move to flee or attack, instead watching her with that same unnerving intelligence she'd witnessed before, heart hammering against her ribs. Mara slowly reached for her pack and withdrew a fresh medical kit. She opened it, displaying the contents, then set it on the ground between them. "You figured out the spray. Let's see if we can do better for those other wounds." For several tense minutes, neither moved. Then, with deliberate slowness, Atlas approached, not directly, but in a wide arc that brought it gradually closer while maintaining escape routes. A predator's caution, but not a predator's aggression. When it stood just 5 meters away, close enough for Mara to see the individual scales along its jaw and the subtle variations in its thermal plates, it stopped. Then, in a gesture that took her breath away, Atlas slowly lowered itself to the ground, exposing its injured flank. Vulnerable, trusting, impossible. With trembling hands, Mara approached and began treating the remaining wounds. She worked methodically, speaking softly the entire time, explaining each step, although she knew the creature couldn't understand her words. What mattered was establishing a pattern, a ritual of safety. "The smaller lacerations have already started healing," she noted, applying antiseptic to a particularly nasty gash along Atlas's hindquarters. "Your cellular regeneration rate is remarkable. No wonder your species has dominated this ecosystem." Atlas remained still throughout the procedure, only the occasional rumble or shift of thermal plates indicating its awareness. When she finished, Mara packed up her supplies and retreated several steps, giving the creature space. "There, that should help. Though I'm still not entirely sure why I'm patching up an apex predator. My xenobiology professors would have a collective aneurysm." To her astonishment, Atlas rose, shook itself like a massive dog, and then performed an elaborate movement with its thermal plates, expanding and contracting them in a rippling pattern she'd never seen before. Then it turned and walked to the stream, looking back at her expectantly. "What?" Mara asked, confused. Atlas dipped its massive head toward the water, then looked at her again. Understanding dawned. "You want me to follow you?" Another rumble, almost gentle this time. Curiosity overriding caution, Mara followed as Atlas led her upstream. After about 10 minutes of careful hiking, they reached a small waterfall cascading from a rock formation. The Arcran stopped, indicating with another head movement. Mara approached cautiously and scanned the water. The readings made her gasp. "This is pure, completely uncontaminated." She looked at Atlas with newfound wonder. "You're showing me clean water sources." The implication staggered her. Not only had Atlas recognized her help and reciprocated, but it had identified something of value to offer in return, something specifically useful to humans, whom it must have observed needed filtered water. That night, back inside the compound, Mara struggled with what to include in her official report. The truth would sound like the delusions of a researcher suffering from isolation syndrome. Corporate would likely pull her from the project immediately. Instead, she documented her medical observations of Arcran healing rates and noted evidence of higher cognitive function than previously recorded, without specifying exactly what that evidence entailed. Her unofficial log, encrypted and stored separately, contained the full account. Day 25. I've established contact with an Arcran specimen I've designated Atlas. Contrary to all corporate data, this creature demonstrates problem-solving abilities, memory retention, reciprocal altruism, and possibly even empathic responses. This isn't just an animal. It's something much closer to what we'd classify as a sentient being. I've violated multiple protocols to continue these interactions, but the potential implications for our understanding of alien intelligence are too significant to ignore. If Arcrans possess this level of cognition, the entire basis for the mining operation's ecological impact assessment is fundamentally flawed. Tomorrow I plan to... An alarm blared, cutting through her thoughts. Red emergency lights pulsed throughout the compound. Mara rushed from her quarters to find chaos in the central plaza. Personnel were running in all directions while security officers shouted orders. She grabbed the arm of a passing technician. "What's happening?" "Fence breach in Sector 7, the woman shouted over the alarm. "Multiple hostiles inside the perimeter." Mara's blood ran cold. Sector 7, directly adjacent to her research tent. She sprinted toward it, ignoring shouts to head for the emergency bunker instead. The scene that greeted her was pandemonium. A section of fence lay completely disabled, sparking uselessly. Through the gap poured a stream of creatures she recognized as cave dwellers from the northern mountains, venomous hexapods with armored exoskeletons and multiple compound eyes. The mining operations must have disturbed their habitat. Security forces had formed a defensive line, pulse rifles firing into the swarm, but they were outnumbered and falling back toward the central complex. "Dr. Nguyen!" Major Solberg spotted her and gestured frantically. "Get to the bunker now!" But Mara wasn't listening. Her research tent stood exposed, directly in the path of the advancing swarm. All her data, samples, equipment, everything she'd discovered about Atlas would be lost. Without thinking, she changed direction. Sprinting toward the tent behind her, Solberg swore, and ordered 2 guards to follow her. But they were immediately engaged by more creatures pouring through the breach. Mara reached her tent just as the first wave of hexapods surrounded it. She ducked inside, grabbing her data cores and sample case. A crash behind her. One of the creatures had broken through the reinforced fabric wall. Its mandibles clicked ominously as it advanced. Mara backed away, searching frantically for a weapon. Her hand closed around a pressurized canister of preservative fluid. Not much, but the chemical was caustic enough to... The tent wall ripped open with a sound like thunder. Mara braced for more hexapods, but instead, a massive scaled form burst through the opening. Atlas, thermal plates fully extended in a threat display, interposed itself between Mara and the creature. What followed was a blur of motion and violence. The hexapod launched itself at Atlas, only to be caught mid-air and crushed between powerful jaws. More creatures poured in, and Atlas fought with calculated fury, using both primary and secondary limbs to devastating effect. Mara wasn't idle. She deployed her sonic emitter at maximum frequency, disorienting several attackers long enough for Atlas to dispatch them. Together, they created a momentary clearing around the tent. "We need to move!" Mara shouted, gesturing toward the main compound, where the defensive line was regrouping. "Too many!" Whether Atlas understood her words or simply her intent, the result was the same. The Archron lowered itself slightly, presenting its back. Mara stared uncomprehending, then understood. "You want me to—" Another hexapod broke through the perimeter. Atlas dispatched it with a swipe of clawed limbs, then looked at Mara with unmistakable urgency, making a decision that defied every survival instinct. Mara climbed onto the creature's back, securing herself by gripping the base of its thermal plates. Atlas immediately surged forward, bursting from the tent and charging toward the compound. Security forces raised their weapons at the approaching Archron, but Mara's shouts held their fire. "Don't shoot, it's helping!" Atlas didn't head for the defensive line, as she'd expected. Instead, it veered toward the disabled fence section, rushing directly into the stream of incoming hexapods. Before Mara could process what was happening, they were through the gap and outside the compound. "Wait, where are you?" Her question died as understanding dawned. Atlas wasn't fleeing. It was heading for the source. A kilometer beyond the fence. They found it. A massive cave entrance now emitting a steady stream of the hexapods. Nearby lay mining equipment, including abandoned explosives intended for expanding the corporation's excavation. Atlas deposited Mara at a safe distance, then charged toward the cave entrance. The stream of creatures diverted, focusing their attack on this new threat. But the Archron wasn't fighting randomly. It circled the entrance, drawing the swarm away from both the cave and the direction of the human compound. Mara suddenly understood what Atlas intended. She sprinted to the abandoned mining equipment and retrieved the explosives, quickly configuring them for remote detonation. Then, timing her approach with Atlas's movements, she placed the charges at key structural points around the cave entrance. "Atlas!" she shouted, retreating to safety. "To me!" The Archron disengaged from the swarm with a final sweeping attack, then bounded toward her position. The moment it cleared the blast radius, Mara triggered the detonator. The explosion rocked the landscape, collapsing the cave entrance in a thunderous cascade of rock and dust. Hexapods already outside scattered in confusion, their coordinated attack dissolving into individual survival responses. In the sudden quiet that followed, Mara found herself standing beside Atlas, both of them breathing heavily as they surveyed the now sealed cave. "We did it," she whispered, reaching out unconsciously to touch the creature's flank. "You understood exactly what needed to happen." Atlas's thermal plates shifted in that now familiar pattern she was beginning to interpret as satisfaction or agreement. Their moment of victory was short-lived. The distant sound of approaching vehicles signaled the compound's security forces had regrouped and were heading their way. Atlas tensed, thermal plates flattening defensively. "No," Mara said firmly, moving to stand between the approaching vehicles and the Archron. "They won't hurt you." "I won't let them." The lead transport skidded to a halt 20 meters away. Major Solberg emerged, pulse rifle raised but not aimed directly at them. "Dr. Nguyen," he called, voice tight with controlled fear. "Step away from the creature, slowly." "The creature," Mara replied without moving, "just saved your entire operation. Major, lower your weapon." For several tense seconds, no one moved. Then Liara stepped from the second transport, her eyes wide as she took in the sealed cave entrance, the scattered hexapod bodies, and the unlikely pair standing before them. "She's right," the engineer said, lowering her own weapon. "Look at the cave. They stopped the swarm at its source." Solberg's gaze flickered between Mara, Atlas, and the collapsed cave entrance. His tactical assessment warred visibly with his training regarding EOS 9's apex predators. "It's going to attack the moment we let our guard down," he insisted, though with less conviction. Mara shook her head. "If it wanted to attack, it's had plenty of opportunities. Atlas has been visiting our perimeter for days. It brought me here specifically to help seal the breach." "Atlas?" Liara asked, one eyebrow raised. "Yes," Mara said firmly. Atlas. And I can prove it's not just some mindless killing machine. Slowly, she turned her back on the security team, facing Atlas directly. She raised her hand, palm out, mimicking a gesture she'd been teaching the creature during their clandestine meetings. Atlas studied her for a moment, then raised one of its secondary limbs, pressing scaled digits against her palm in a deliberate mirror of her action. Behind her, she heard Solberg swear softly, followed by the sound of weapons being lowered. "What exactly have you discovered out here, Doctor?" the Major asked, his voice now tinged with reluctant wonder. Mara smiled, eyes still locked with Atlas's amber gaze. "The beginning of something extraordinary." In the days that followed, an uneasy truce formed. Mara was officially reprimanded for protocol violations, but privately commended for preventing what could have been a catastrophic breach. Her research parameters were expanded to include controlled interaction studies, though most of the security team remained skeptical about her claims regarding Arcran intelligence. Atlas, bearing new wounds from the hexapod encounter, was permitted within a specially designated area of the compound for medical treatment and behavioral observation. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just until the creature healed and Mara completed her preliminary studies. But healing didn't lead to separation. Instead, it cemented a bond that defied scientific classification. 1 month after the cave incident, Mara sat outside her new research tent, now positioned at the edge of the compound, with a direct view of the wilderness beyond. The night air filtered through her portable purifier, allowing her to work without the full exosuit for brief periods. A soft rustling in the nearby vegetation announced Atlas's arrival. The Arcran had taken to patrolling the perimeter each night, maintaining a distance of exactly 5 meters from her tent, close enough to watch over her, but far enough to avoid making the remaining security personnel nervous. "Right on schedule," Mara noted, making an entry in her log. "Subject maintains consistent timing in territorial rounds." Atlas rumbled softly, settling into its now customary position. The creature's thermal plates shifted into what Mara had begun to recognize as a relaxed configuration. "You know," she continued conversationally, "the corporation is still trying to decide what to do about you. About us. The preliminary report I submitted has caused quite a stir back on Earth. Apparently, the idea that we might need to reconsider our definition of intelligence has some people very uncomfortable." Atlas tilted its massive head, amber eyes reflecting the gentle glow of Mara's worklights. "I've recommended a complete reassessment of the ecological impact statements for the mining operation. If Arcrans possess the level of cognition you've demonstrated, then legally, the corporation has to establish communication protocols before continuing extraction." She smiled, setting aside her tablet. "Which means I might be staying on EOS 9 a bit longer than planned. Hope you don't mind the company." The Arcran rose, stretched in a motion reminiscent of Earth's big cats, and performed a circuit around the tent's perimeter. When it returned to its starting position, it deliberately scored 3 parallel marks in the soil, the same marks Mara had found that first morning after their encounter. "Yes," she said softly, understanding the message. "This is your territory too now. We'll find a way to make it work." As EOS 9's twin moons rose higher, casting their vermilion light across the alien landscape, Dr. Mara Nguyen continued her notes, while the apex predator that science had labeled mindless kept vigilant watch, not as captor or captive, but as something unprecedented in human exploration, a bridge between worlds built on mutual recognition of something deeper than instinct, more fundamental than language. Understanding? In her final transmission before the communications window closed for the night, Mara added one personal observation to her official report. Perhaps the true apex intelligence isn't measured by technological advancement or evolutionary dominance, but by the capacity to recognize kinship across the seemingly uncrossable void of species. If so, Then Atlas may have as much to teach us about being human as we have to teach it about being Arcran. Outside, 5 meters from her tent. Exactly where it had been every night since the cave incident. The predator that had once been surrounded and snarling now slept peacefully. Thermal plates gently pulsing in synchronization with the distant calls of its wild kin. Not quite domesticated, never that, but reconciled. A guardian at the threshold between two worlds. And for Mara, a living reminder that sometimes the most profound discoveries happen not when we observe from a distance, but when we find the courage to cross boundaries we once thought uncrossable.